She was the youngest self-made female billionaire in the world. She was on the cover of every major magazine. Presidents praised her. Famous generals sat on her board. Investors threw hundreds of millions of dollars at her without blinking. They called her the next Steve Jobs. She built a company worth $9 billion that promised to change medicine forever, to run hundreds of health tests from a single, painless drop of blood. There was just one problem. The machine at the center of it all had never actually worked. Not once. Not in a way that could be trusted with a human life. And she knew it. This is the story of Theranos, the biggest fraud in the history of Silicon Valley. A lie so bold that it fooled billionaires, doctors, and the United States government. And it didn't just cost people money. It put real patients in danger. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how one woman convinced the smartest people in the world to believe in a machine that didn't exist, and how it all came crashing down. Because here's what makes this story so disturbing. Theranos wasn't run by some obvious con artist. It was run by a soft-spoken Stanford dropout in a black turtleneck who genuinely seemed to believe she was saving the world. And almost everyone who met her believed it too. So how did she do it? How do you fake a medical revolution in front of the entire planet? There's a secret room inside that company where the real machines were hidden. There are two young whistleblowers who risked everything to expose the truth and got threatened for it. And there's a moment in a courtroom years later that finally answered the question everyone was asking. Did she actually believe her own lie? We'll get to all of it. But to understand how big the fall was, you have to understand how high she climbed. So let's go back to where it started. The year is 2003. A 19-year-old student named Elizabeth Holmes is studying chemical engineering at Stanford University, one of the best schools in the world. She's brilliant, intense, and absolutely certain she's going to do something enormous. She idolizes Steve Jobs. She wants to build a company that changes the world the way Apple did. And she has an idea that, on the surface, is genuinely beautiful. Holmes says she's terrified of needles. And she notices something about modern medicine. Getting your blood tested is slow, expensive, and unpleasant. A big needle in your arm, vials of blood, days of waiting for results. So she imagines a different future. What if you could run a huge range of health tests from just a tiny finger prick? One painless drop of blood, fast results, cheap enough that anyone could catch a disease early, before it's too late. It's the kind of idea that makes people lean in. Early detection saves lives. A world where you could test your own blood at the corner pharmacy could genuinely change everything. So Holmes drops out of Stanford, takes the money her parents had saved for her tuition, and starts a company. She calls it Theranos, a blend of the words therapy and diagnosis. And here's the first thing you have to understand about why this worked. The dream was perfect. It was a story everyone wanted to be true. A young woman leaving an elite university to take on a broken industry and save lives. It was inspiring. It was marketable. And critically, almost nobody asked the most basic question. Was it actually possible? Holmes was a master storyteller. She had this calm, deep, deliberate voice. She locked eye contact and barely blinked. She wore black turtlenecks, just like her hero Steve Jobs. She spoke about her mission with the certainty of a prophet. When Elizabeth Holmes told you the future was coming, you believed her, because she so clearly believed it herself. And the money started to flow. This is where the story goes, from ambitious to unbelievable. Theranos raised more than $700 million from investors, not from medical experts who understood blood science, but from some of the wealthiest and most powerful people in America. And here is the detail that should have been a giant red flag. Many of them invested precisely because Holmes refused to explain how her technology worked. Think about that. Normally, if you are handing someone millions of dollars, you demand to see proof. But Holmes framed her secrecy as genius. She said the technology was so revolutionary, so valuable, that she could not risk revealing it. And instead of scaring investors away, that mystery made them want in even more. The less she showed, the more magical it seemed. Then she did something truly masterful. She built a board of directors that looked absolutely untouchable. Former secretaries of state, famous generals, powerful statesmen, some of the most respected names in the entire country. The kind of people whose presence makes everyone assume, well, if they are involved, it must be legitimate. But notice what was missing from that board. Doctors, scientists, blood testing experts, the people who could have actually evaluated whether the machine worked at all. The board was built for credibility, not for truth. And it worked perfectly. Their famous names became a shield. Who is going to accuse a company backed by war heroes and statesmen of being a fraud? By 2014, Theranos was valued at around $9 billion. Elizabeth Holmes, on paper, was worth roughly $4.5 billion, making her the youngest self-made female billionaire on the planet. She was a global icon. She gave TED Talks. She was celebrated as proof that one determined person could take on $1 trillion industry and win. And then came the deal that brought her dream out of the lab and into the real world. Theranos partnered with Walgreens, one of the largest pharmacy chains in America, to put Theranos blood testing centers inside their stores. The plan was for ordinary people to walk into their local pharmacy, give a tiny finger prick of blood, and get a full panel of health results. The future Holmes had promised was finally about to touch real human beings. Which brings us to the question this whole story turns on. If the technology didn't work, what exactly were they testing all those people's blood on? The answer is the dark heart of this entire scandal. Because behind the sleek marketing and the inspiring speeches, Theranos was hiding a devastating secret. The machine never worked. Theranos had a device. They called it the Edison, and later other versions. It was supposed to be the miracle box, the thing that ran hundreds of tests from a single drop. But in reality, it could only perform a small number of tests, and even those were unreliable. The results were inconsistent, sometimes wildly wrong. The dream of running a huge range of tests from one tiny drop of blood was, scientifically, something they simply could not do. So what did they do when real patients started coming in through Walgreens, expecting real results? They cheated. Instead of using their own magic machine, Theranos secretly ran most of their tests on standard, commercial blood testing machines, the same kind of equipment made by other companies that hospitals already used. The very technology Holmes claimed to be replacing was the technology she was quietly relying on. And worse, because Holmes insisted on using those tiny finger prick samples, there often wasn't enough blood. So they would dilute the small samples to make them go further. And diluting a blood sample can throw off the results, making them even less accurate. Let that sink in. Real people walking into a pharmacy, trusting a celebrated company with their health, were getting test results that could be flat out wrong. Results about whether they had a serious illness. And some of them did get terrifying, incorrect results. People were told they might have serious medical conditions when they didn't, and others may have been falsely reassured when something was actually wrong. This wasn't a startup over-promising on a phone feature. This was a company gambling with human lives. So how did they keep this hidden, with so many employees who must have known something was wrong? Fear. Inside Theranos, there was a culture of intense secrecy and intimidation. Different teams were kept separate, so no single employee could see the full picture. People were watched. Anyone who raised concerns was pushed out, threatened, or made an example of. And much of that enforcement came from a man named Sunny Balwani, Theranos' president and chief operating officer. Here is a detail almost nobody on the outside knew at the time. Sunny Balwani was secretly Elizabeth Holmes's boyfriend. He was significantly older than her, and together they ran the company with an iron grip. Balwani was known for being harsh and controlling, ruling through fear. Employees described an environment where you didn't dare question the official story. You did your job, you kept your head down, and you didn't ask what was happening in the other rooms. But you can only contain the truth for so long. And it turned out the people brave enough to break the silence were some of the youngest and least powerful people in the entire building. One of them was a young scientist named Erika Cheung. Another was a man named Tyler Shultz, and his story is almost impossible to believe. Because Tyler's grandfather was George Shultz, one of those legendary statesmen sitting on the Theranos board. Tyler went to work at Theranos, partly because his own grandfather championed it, and what he saw on the inside horrified him. The data did not add up. The tests were failing. The results could not be trusted. Imagine the position he was in. To tell the truth, he would have to go against his own famous grandfather and against one of the most celebrated companies in the world. And when Tyler raised concerns, Theranos came down on him hard, with legal pressure and threats that reportedly strained his own family to the breaking point. These were not powerful executives blowing the whistle. These were young people in their 20s, risking their careers and their relationships, because they could not stay silent about something that was hurting patients. And their courage reached exactly the right person. An investigative reporter at the Wall Street Journal named John Carreyrou. In October of 2015, Carreyrou published the story that started the avalanche. Drawing on insider accounts, he revealed the truth. Theranos' technology did not work the way the company claimed, and it was secretly relying on other companies' machines. The $9 billion miracle was built on a lie. Now, here's where most frauds would collapse instantly. But Theranos did not, at first. Because Holmes did what she always did. She fought back with sheer confidence. She went on television and dismissed the reporting. She framed the story as the work of doubters trying to tear down a visionary woman who was changing the world. For a moment, it almost worked. Her reputation and an army of powerful backers formed a strong shield. But this time, the truth had real evidence behind it. And once the dam broke, it shattered completely. Regulators stepped in and inspected the Theranos labs, and what they found was alarming enough that they took drastic action. The government moved to ban Elizabeth Holmes from owning or operating a medical lab. Theranos was forced to void or correct enormous numbers of blood tests that real patients and their doctors had relied on to make medical decisions. Walgreens ended the partnership and shut down the testing centers. The dream of blood tests at your local pharmacy was over, and the value of the company, that $9 billion valuation, evaporated. It did not shrink, it vanished. On paper, Elizabeth Holmes went from being worth $4.5 billion to being worth essentially nothing. In 2018, the company was hit with serious fraud charges from financial regulators, and later that year, Theranos shut down for good. The empire was gone. But for Elizabeth Holmes, the financial collapse was only the beginning. This was not just a failed business. Prosecutors believed it was a crime. Holmes and Sunny Balwani were both criminally charged with fraud, accused of deceiving investors and patients about what their technology could actually do. This is the part of the story the whole world watched, because it answered the question everyone had been asking from the start. Did Elizabeth Holmes know she was lying? Was she a calculating con artist, or a true believer whose dreams spiraled out of control? Her trial became a national spectacle. The defense argued that she genuinely believed in her vision, that she was an optimistic founder whose company simply failed, the way many startups do. The prosecution argued something far darker, that she knowingly lied again and again about results, about partnerships, about what the machine could do, all to keep the money flowing. In early 2022, the jury delivered its verdict. Elizabeth Holmes was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud, specifically for deceiving the investors who poured their fortunes into her lie. Later that year, she was sentenced to more than 11 years in prison. Sunny Balwani was convicted in a separate trial and sentenced to even more time. The young woman once celebrated as the next Steve Jobs, the youngest self-made female billionaire in the world, was going to federal prison. So how did it happen? How did one person fool billionaires, generals, statesmen, and an entire industry with a machine that never worked? It comes down to one uncomfortable truth. People didn't believe in Theranos because they saw proof. They believed in it because they wanted the story to be true. Everyone wanted to believe in the genius young founder saving lives. Investors wanted in on the next Apple. Famous board members wanted to back a world-changing cause. The media wanted an inspiring hero. And Elizabeth Holmes gave them all exactly the story they were hungry for, wrapped in a black turtleneck and delivered in that unwavering, hypnotic voice. The dream was so good that almost nobody did the boring, unglamorous work of checking whether it was real. And that's the part that should genuinely frighten you. This wasn't a scam run out of a dark basement. This was a fraud celebrated on magazine covers, funded by the powerful, and protected by the famous for years. The very things that should have triggered suspicion, the secrecy, the lack of medical experts, the impossible promises, were reframed as proof of genius. Confidence was treated as competence. A great story was mistaken for the truth. But the real cost of Theranos was never the money. The investors who lost their fortunes were wealthy enough to survive it. The people who truly paid the price were the ordinary patients. Men and women who trusted a finger prick of blood with the most important questions a person can ask. Am I healthy? Is something wrong with me? And they were handed answers that might have been completely false. That is the part of this story that should never be forgotten. Behind the $9 billion headline were real human beings, frightened by results that should never have been trusted. Elizabeth Holmes wanted to be the next Steve Jobs, and in a strange, tragic way, she proved how powerful a great story can be, powerful enough to build a $9 billion company on nothing but belief. The problem is, you can fool people for a long time, but you cannot fool a drop of blood. Theranos was the dream that was too good to be true, and almost everyone fell for it anyway. But it is far from the only giant brought down by its own illusions. We have covered companies that ruled the world and then collapsed, from Nokia to BlackBerry to MySpace, each one undone by a different fatal flaw. If you want to see how another titan fell, that story is right here on screen. So here's a question for the comments. Do you think Elizabeth Holmes was a deliberate con artist or a true believer who could not admit she was wrong? Drop your verdict below. I read them all. Hit subscribe, because every week we autopsy another giant. I'm out. See you in the next downfall.